The story begins with our protagonist begging the old man not to die. Then he directs his gaze to a person named Luna while staring at her with eyes full of hatred, saying he will never forgive her, absolutely won't, even though he loved her. However, all of this seems to have been just a dream of our protagonist, who upon opening his eyes says he dreamed it again while holding his head worriedly. He tells us that unfortunately now he has an even worse headache because he must marry one of the 10 brides his father found for him while breaking off the engagements with the rest one by one. This is really stressful. However, the protagonist is lucky because having 10 brides is literally insane. Later, we encounter this girl who considers herself lucky because John showed her boyfriend Sun Ki-min's true character, a scoundrel who was two-timing her, and she had to quickly end the relationship. A few seconds later, the girl arrives home and realizes her parents are arguing with someone, saying he is not worthy of their daughter and needs to look at himself. The girl doesn't understand what's happening and asks. It is revealed that the person they are arguing with is our protagonist who, upon seeing the girl, introduces himself as her fiancé. This leaves the girl shocked and her father explains that her grandfather arranged the marriage before he died and he swore to honor. However, the wife does not agree and believes that only Sun Ki-min is worthy of their daughter since the San family is one of the 4 main families in the city of Gennaro. The girl, who had already broken up with Sun Ki-min, tries to explain that there is a misunderstanding since she is not there to get married but rather to break off the engagement, which irritates the lady. She asks the protagonist if he doesn't think about her daughter's happiness, which leaves him embarrassed. The girl named Fran interrupts and asserts that it is 2028 and she is in charge of her marriage, deciding what will happen from now on. However, the protagonist announces that he is withdrawing from the marriage and says goodbye to everyone before he can leave. Sun Ki-min arrives, Fran's supposed boyfriend. Mrs. Alborough is pleased with his timely arrival and grants permission for him to take Fran for a walk. Sun Ki-min notices the protagonist and asks if he is related to them. The lady, a little worried about revealing the protagonist's identity, says he is. However, before she can finish her sentence, Fran interrupts to say that the protagonist is her husband, surprising everyone, including the protagonist. He asks incredulously since she is his girlfriend and if she wants to marry someone, she should marry him, which is somewhat logical since he is supposedly her boyfriend. However, the girl continues to deny this and calls him a scoundrel. She says she feels like she's dirtying her mouth by saying another word. So, the protagonist grabs her arm to leave. Well, to leave with him. I sincerely hope the girl doesn't regret this because at first glance, she seems very confident in what she's saying. However, while she is sure of what she's doing, her mother isn't. She asks, what the hell is she doing asking to come back? But the girl, ignoring her mother's words, leaves the place with the protagonist, leaving everyone speechless. Processing what happened, the annoyed guy tells the lady that she should remember that the dowry of 300 million from his family is for the Hyuden family, sincerely hoping they can handle the marriage because they know what will happen if they don't. The lady, who knows very well what will happen if it doesn't happen, tells him not to worry because they know what they're doing. As they walk, the protagonist, passing by Linfen and the girl, can observe that while they move away, the protagonist tells the girl they are far enough to leave. However, when the protagonist was about to do so, upon touching her neck, he felt a familiar point. This surprised him a bit since he had only seen this unique meridian once when he was a child. To clear his doubts, he asks the girl if someone bit her on the neck when she was a child, words that surprise the girl, who stops and asks how he knows that. The protagonist tells her that he knows because he visited her when she was a child and he was the one who bit her. The girl, upon hearing this, rebukes him, asking how he dares to mention that matter, almost hitting him. However, before she can do that, he stops her, gets close, and asks if she remembers her mother. These words make the girl go back to her childhood when she cried and told the protagonist's mother that he intimidated her and bit her. In her memory, she begged her not to cry, apologizing. The protagonist, upon remembering this, tells Linfen that from what he remembers, her mother was a very kind and beautiful woman, which leaves Linfen curious. She starts asking many questions, and in her questions, she asks if she remembers anything else since her mother disappeared on the day she asked if someone took her away or where was the last time she saw her. This causes the girl to be bombarded with many questions and she responds by saying that if he wants to know, there is a condition. He must marry her and get the certificate. Some time later, we find out that the girl convinced the protagonist because as they walked, he told her that he gave her what she wanted. And now it's time for her to tell him what she wants. The girl asks for a moment, saying she first needs to sort out some pending issues. After sending a photo to her boyfriend to show that she got married, she thanks the protagonist and says she will now tell him everything she knows. However, before she can do so, she receives a text message, and upon seeing it, she becomes quite worried, telling the protagonist they need to go to her house first. Shortly afterward, the girl arrives home, and upon entering, she asks her parents why all her cards have been frozen. Her father, showing the photo she sent to her boyfriend, says that's why. Her mother scolds her for it, saying she's trying to bankrupt them since the $300 million request from the SBA family disappeared, and it's her fault for breaking up with her boyfriend. However, even though the situation is a bit tense, the girl does not retract her words because she tells her mother that she saw with her own eyes her boyfriend holding a foreign girl in his arms. Furthermore, she believes her boyfriend was just playing with her, and therefore, she thinks he's not worth it, calling him garbage. Her mother, faced with this, says that even if that's the case, a request for $300 million can increase the family's value by 30%, and therefore, you can't afford to fight with the family. The girl hears this from her own mother in a different way as she lets tears run down her face. She sadly asks her mother if she's trying to sell her, questioning if she's still her mother. The protagonist, seeing how the situation is unfolding, asks if it's just $300 million, saying that amount is not a problem for him as he will provide it himself. However, Mrs. S, upon hearing that Linen will provide the money, says it's $300 million, not 300, questioning what he thinks he is. Doubtfully, she asks if he intends to be an L, something unspecified in the story, and the protagonist, as he literally married her daughter and has the certificate to prove it, shows that he does. And so the protagonist says it's a piece of cake, and tomorrow at the same time, the $300 million will be there. Mrs. S tells the protagonist that if he does so, then she will give him her daughter, but if not, he'll have to die in front of Sang's eyes. The girl, while wiping away tears, tells the protagonist they should leave there, which upsets her father because he says he can accompany the protagonist to say goodbye, but she can't go with him. However, the girl once again ignores her father's words and takes the protagonist with her. When they're outside, the girl seems not to believe the protagonist very much and asks if he's going to run away, which the protagonist denies. Instead, he takes her phone, changes the number, and tells her that since he saved her number, someone will contact her. He gives her back the phone and says he will definitely keep his promise to her and her father, but she mustn't forget what she promised him, which is to talk about her mother after saying goodbye to the girl. Lin Fame, who was nearby, says that half of the richest people in the city live there. The protagonist plans to use this opportunity to make money, and to do so quickly. He crashes through a wall onto private property where a man is training. However, the protagonist informs the man that it's a shame he developed his dark energy but has internal injuries preventing him from progressing in life. However, as Linf invaded private property, the man asks who he is and prepares to use his white soul. Before doing so, the man stops him and asks the protagonist if he can see with the naked eye that there's something wrong with his body, which the protagonist confirms, saying he can see it and even heal his internal injuries. However, the price to heal him is about $300 million. The man doesn't believe much in that and asks the protagonist's father not to listen to the protagonist's nonsense. To prove he's not talking nonsense, the protagonist gathers energy in his hand and directs it at the man. The father, upon seeing the protagonist send his son flying with his energy, is impressed and realizes the protagonist is a master. Approaching the protagonist, the father says that $300 million are nothing to him, asking when he will deliver it and how long it will take to heal Linfen. As Linfen examines him, he informs that his wound is not easy to treat and will take at least half a month to heal, which is too long for him. And Senor doesn't think the same way as the protagonist because he is shocked to hear that it will only take half a month while he thinks he has been plagued by this internal wound for 20 years, and many famous doctors couldn't cure him. The protagonist asserts that he can heal him in just half a month, which is impressive to the Senor. He approaches the protagonist to examine him and make sure he's not just talking without basis. As he touches the Senor's back, he asks if it hurts, and the Senor affirms with great pain, explaining that the wound hurts every time it rains and that it's fine that day. The protagonist realizes that the Senor is really suffering and without saying much, channels his energy into him, sending him flying. Surprisingly, the senor doesn't get hurt by the fall because he feel the energy flowing through what used to be dead flesh. The protagonist approaches and asks if he would like him to do it again, and senor agrees. This time senor doesn't fall to the ground and stands up vigorously. Feng, seeing that senor is full of energy, says he will give him a prescription and will be back in a week, but for now he will have to send the 300 million. Senor agrees without any problems. At night the scene changes to Ruin's house, where her father comments that she has a bad eye for choosing people, suggesting that the protagonist must have run away. Her mother also says that a loser like the protagonist, who doesn't even have a decent job, could never gather 300 million. However, Ruin has total confidence in the protagonist and asserts that he will definitely return with the money, which seems to be heard as someone knocks on the door to inform Senorita Yuck that there is a knight claiming to be from the Show family waiting outside, and she is surprised and thrilled to hear that he is from the Show family. She wonders if he could be the one she is expecting, but before she finishes the sentence she jumps from her chair and rushes to open the door. Her parents, also curious, decide to take a look outside the house. The man introduces himself as Senor Juan, and he is there to discuss a request for $300 million. Yuck's parents are shocked and wonder if the 300 million are really there. They realize that Mr. Juan is the commercial representative of the Show family, one of the four main families, and they kindly invite him in. He accepts but clarifies that Mr. Show has instructed that only the Miss can sign the request, and Yuck is thrilled to realize that the protagonist has fulfilled his promise and brought the money, not running away from the situation. After signing all the papers, Mr. Juan tells Yuck that someone will contact her later to advance further, and he accompanies Senor Juan to the exit and thanks him for coming. He kindly tells her not to worry, as it is a small matter. However, after Senor Juan leaves, someone approaches Yuck and asks her if she received the 300 million. The person is the protagonist, and Yuck quickly hugs him to thank him for fulfilling his promise of the story. The protagonist tells him that they have to go in. While they are inside, the portal informs the girl's parents that he did what he promised and therefore wants to take her and Rin. However, things are not as easy as they seem, since the girl's mother says it must have been Chan's daughter who did everything, not him, taking advantage of the situation. He tells the protagonist that he will not hand over his daughter until he receives another order for $300 million and warns the woman not to be abusive, as his patience has limits. Ruin, hearing such words from her mother with tears in her eyes, she asks her what she is talking about and if she will break her word. Her word approaches her husband for him to see how the daughter is speaking to her. When she sees this, the girl is really impressed and disappointed with her parents and asks if they see her only as a commodity for which they can be blackmailed. The girl, seeing this side of her parents that she did not know, grabs the protagonist's arm and tells him that they need to get out of there, since this kind of place cannot be their home. Linden tells the girl not to get angry, as after all they are her parents and may not be in their right mind at the moment, but they will be fine when they calm down. However, the girl, ignoring a little of what the prota says, timidly asks him if his bank card and credit card were frozen and if he also has nowhere to go, asking if he can take her home. Enon responds by telling him that his father has a small one in the middle of the city and there is an empty house there. Although it is in a medium state, it is habitable, which leaves the girl excited and grateful. The next morning, they go to Daongan University, to the Academic Affairs building, where our protagonist is already approaching some students who are working and studying. When he approaches, he greets them and asks where the girl is. Before that, he asks the protagonist if he has a date, to which he replies no, but that he is her friend. However, the boy does not believe the protagonist and threatens to call the school security if he does not leave. The protagonist, upset with the treatment he's receiving, asks if the guy is saying he's a criminal before the guy can respond. Just then, someone appears, one of the brides of the university vice president, named L. Rose, the same girl the protagonist was looking for. She asks what's going on. The protagonist blushes at her beauty but then smiles and hands his identification to her. The girl realizes it's the identification of her fiancé, Linen, which surprises her because her grandfather wasn't kidding when he said he had a fiancé for her. Ignoring these thoughts, she rudely tells the protagonist that he's there to marry her. He responds that they certainly won't get married immediately, but they can start as friends. He thinks she's the kind girl he likes and gets excited. He says there will be no refund because marriage is not something that can be refunded. While he is lost in his thoughts, the man asks about his identity and says he is not worthy of the lady. He shows friendliness towards the protagonist but not towards the girl, smiling as he greets both. When she sees the man's car parked almost at the entrance, she asks him to park it in the parking space. Senor S tells her not to worry as he has reserved a newly opened restaurant and plans to go with her, asking if she wants to try it. However, the girl declines the invitation as she has a meeting with the Ministry of Education and fears she may not make it. She then looks at the protagonist and tells him she will accompany him to his office as they will discuss the matter in detail. However, when the girl mentions the protagonist's name, he ends up recognizing it and wonders if Lin is an enemy of his brother or if he has come to connect with him. However, looking at the protagonist, he dismisses this idea as he is very different from the casual nature of Kem's game. He must marry her to have connections with the government in the hands of the Lan family, one of the 4 main families of Anshan. He asserts that if the protagonist interferes, he will see what he is capable of. In Miss Lore's room, she asks the protagonist if he went to see his grandfather, and he responds that the girl has not yet gone. Upon hearing this, she says it's better that way since it's a matter between the two of them and she doesn't want a third person to intervene. She becomes serious and confesses to the protagonist that she doesn't want to marry him. Linfen smiles and says it's okay because he will never force her, let alone pressure her. They exchange phone numbers, and the girl is surprised at how easy it is to talk to the protagonist, wondering if he really won't use the marriage contract to force her. Hours pass, and at noon that day, after settling everything, the protagonist asks the girl if he can buy her ramen. She agrees and says she's happy he's willing to invite her, making it clear that it's not a requirement. However, the protagonist has no money, and the girl asks for a small ramen. He responds that he is unemployed and doesn't have much money, which surprises her. The girl's attempts to ask something to the protagonist are interrupted by a bald man who starts shouting in the place. They turn to see what is happening and realize that the bald man is yelling at the protagonist, asking him to kneel and bow 3 times, threatening to rip off an arm or a leg. The protagonist asks the man to calm down so as not to leave a bad impression on his friends, referring to the girl. However, the girl is worried about what Lin Fena will do. Before taking any action, the bald man tells her to wait and then turns to the wealthy man, saying he is unemployed but is a military doctor. He suggests that if she marries him, he can keep his promises. This apparently impresses the girl, who asks the protagonist if he is a doctor, but he clarifies that he is a military doctor. Meanwhile, he wonders what the point of bringing it up now is while holding the bald man's shoulder. The protagonist confirms what the girl said, that he is a military doctor and very good at it, especially in constructing human skeletons. He warns the bald man to be careful, and with a swift movement, he instantly breaks his arm, making him scream in pain. The men accompanying the bald man are impressed because they couldn't even see when the protagonist broke his arm. They end up leaving their boss behind. The girl is also impressed by what the protagonist did, as the bones and joints of young adults are very strong and rarely dislocate easily. She asks how bones can dislocate when touched. The protagonist tests the bald man, asking him to touch his arm, which he does immediately, causing him to scream in pain. However, when the protagonist lightly taps his shoulder, the pain disappears, and he claims to no longer feel any pain. He puts the dislocated arm back in place, causing the bully to ask why he dislocated it again. The protagonist doesn't answer and asks the girl if it's fun. The bully bows to the protagonist and apologizes, admitting he made a mistake. The bald man, with tears in his eyes, reveals that it was Mr. S who sent him and gave him 10,000 to humiliate the protagonist in front of the girl. The girl says he deserved only an injury, and as the protagonist adjusts the bald man's arm, he agrees. The bully thanks the protagonist several times and gives him money before leaving with tears in his eyes. The protagonist suggests they could eat somewhere nice, but the girl informs that they already ordered the food so they need to finish first. She finds the protagonist interesting, but receives a call from her grandfather who asks her to accompany him to meet him at home after dinner. The protagonist agrees to accompany her without any issues. When they arrive at the girl's house, they notice the presence of many security guards guarding the place. The girl's grandfather is happy to see her but is surprised to notice Linfen's presence, to whom he reveals belongs to a special department of the National Secret Army and is a member of the ATM organization. This impresses the girl, who asks her grandfather if the protagonist is one of the dead doctors from NCK. The grandfather confirms and questions if she thinks she would find a normal man to be her fiancé. The girl gets excited and approaches the protagonist to ask him to tell her about the country's #1 dead doctor, who is her idol. However, Linfen can't respond well to her words since the girl had buried the protagonist's arm in her chest, which distracts him. When the girl's grandfather realizes what's happening, he reprimands her to pay attention to her actions, and she becomes very embarrassed. He asks the protagonist if his father told him about his situation, something the protagonist denies. The old man then reveals that he has 3 children, the oldest being the head of the 3rd Division of the Hidden Legion and the 2nd Vice Chief. This impresses the protagonist, who asks what the 3rd Division is because according to his information, that sector was annihilated in a single operation and no one survived. The grandfather confirms this but says that the 3rd son dedicated himself to business and didn't get involved in those things. R is his only daughter and granddaughter who currently works in the 1st Division of the Hidden Legion. Changing the subject a bit, the old man reveals to the protagonist that he hasn't introduced himself yet, saying that he is the one and has just retired from the 1st Division of the Hidden Legion. The protagonist interrupts and says it's a coincidence that they both retired, which leads the old man to affirm that the protagonist is young and that they did the equivalent of 100 years of work of 100 elite members of the Hidden Legion. However, the protagonist doesn't want to continue talking about this subject and asks a favor of the old man, which is not specified. Later, the protagonist meets Ru Jin, who tells him that her parents called her to inform that the Ministry of Commerce rejected the $300 million contract and they may face a large payment for damages. She believes the protagonist is responsible for this and asks what's going on. Miss Lauro appears and says that everything that's happening is due to her grandfather's pressure and that the protagonist is getting revenge on her. She knows the protagonist, calls him by his name, and asks what he's doing there, implying that he knows things she doesn't. Miss Lauro scolds the protagonist for being with another woman and asks him to stay away from Lan. The protagonist questions why he should do that, knowing her situation, and prefers Lan's company. The girl is upset with the protagonist's attitude and tells him that he's kind. She reveals that she and Lan were in the same class from elementary to high school, sharing information about Lan's behavior. She claims that Lan smokes and drinks and that he's the type of person she likes. The protagonist and the girl almost have the same thought, and he reprimands her, saying that the past doesn't matter because Lan's grandfather is now helping the girl. He advises her not to treat him badly. However, the girl states that she's used to it, although the protagonist doesn't believe her, thinking she's pretending. The girl asks the protagonist to buy something to eat and then come back so she can talk to Ru Jin alone to clarify any misunderstandings. The protagonist agrees to the idea, but before leaving, he warns her to pay attention to her attitude. When the girl is alone with Ru Jin, she reveals that there was indeed a misunderstanding but tells him not to pretend because she has recordings and videos. The thing that makes her take off her glasses and show us her true face as she is, and I say this because the girl now adopts a completely different attitude called bad cow, telling her that she didn't believe she had the skills to commit to the protagonist, and well, things are getting interesting. Ru Jin smiled a bit at this and told him that this is her true face and completely changed her attitude, asking her if the protagonist really likes her or if he's with her to harm her. While looking at her with a downcast gaze, he tells her that he met the protagonist a few hours ago. So what's the point of saying he likes her? Approaching her, he said he never stopped thinking about her, which makes her think she already knew that since it's a sadistic thing. Then she removes her hand from his face and tells him she thought the protagonist was good and wanted to experience the reason. She says this calmly and directly, that she is grateful to her grandfather for helping her with words she almost considers a threat, as she asks him if he is telling her that the protagonist is hers and that she should stay away from him, which is cruel. However, when he says this, he believes that her curiosity about the protagonist leads to blush. And she says that's interesting, while thinking that the little cow, by saying that, only makes it good that she's curious about the protagonist who wants to get closer to him. After that, time passes and 2 days later they meet at this luxurious hotel where Lin F met Ruin. The protagonist informs the girl that Sun Kimin prevented them from talking here since this hotel is owned by the S family. But as it is not totally safe, he tells her to be careful when he passed something to her. The girl, who was wearing a beautiful and elegant dress, curious about what the protagonist gave her, asks what it is. The protagonist smiles and responds saying it's insurance. When they enter the place, Kimin was waiting for them. When he saw them, he asked the protagonist and the girl to sit down and asked for the food to be served. However, Ru Jin, who had broken up with him earlier, approached him to say not to bother him since he was alone. However, he did not let her finish and invited her to sit down and talk while they ate. The protagonist, a little insecure, takes her shoulder and tells her to sit down and not to worry, also saying that this meal is an invitation from Lord Sanwell, from Lord San, and therefore it should not be cheap. After serving the food, S prevents them from opening the wine, and when they do, he tells the heroes and the girl that everything they are seeing, including wine, is not available. The protagonist responds smiling, saying it's insurance. After they enter, the girl, even though the wine looks appetizing, ends up refusing since she's going to drive so she can't drink. However, the protagonist tells Rui they can call a driver to take them, asking how not to try such good wine. She tells him that this wine is champagne and it's very good. While she thinks it's indeed a champagne, she's never seen it. Makes it clear that this guy is planning something. The protagonist as he passes the glass. However, regretting the case, this is how we end this video. But bro, don't be sad about the end of the video, but be happy about what happened. But if you liked it, leave your like. If you want the continuation, leave your comment below, and remember, it's very good that the lazy soul wants everything but nothing reaches.